Welcome to While We Were Distracted, the podcast where we explore topics that often get overshadowed in the rush of daily life.
I want you to imagine, just for a second, that I've handed you a blank map of the United States.
Okay, a blank map.
Right. And I give you two markers, a green one and a black one. And I ask you to do just this one thing. Color in the states that are, aggressively building massive amounts of green energy right now in 2026 with the green marker.
Right.
And then use the black marker for the states that are actively rolling back their climate regulations and giving breaks to polluters.
I mean, if you follow the news even casually, you probably feel pretty confident about how you'd color that map in.
Exactly. You'd probably color the West Coast and the Northeast green, and you'd color the South and the Midwest black. But what if I told you that, according to the latest data, your map is probably, completely entirely backwards?
It's a phenomenal paradox, honestly, because when you actually look at the grid,
Yeah.
at where the physical infrastructure is being built versus where policies are being delayed, it kind of forces you to completely reevaluate everything you thought you knew about American energy policy.
And that unexpected role reversal is exactly what we're exploring today. We are grounding this deep dive in a really fantastic, deeply reported article from The Guardian. It was published on June 4th, 2026, and it's titled, "California and New York Weaken Climate Rules as Red States Ramp Up Green Energy."
It's a wild headline.
It is. And the mission today is to figure out why the traditional climate champions are suddenly, hitting the brakes, and how states that are historically tied to fossil fuels are quietly becoming these renewable superpowers.
Right, and before we dive into the deep end here, we need to set some ground rules for you, the listener.
Oh, definitely.
Because we are dealing with highly polarized, politically charged state policies today involving both prominent Democrats and Republicans. And we want to be very clear that we're not taking sides here.
Not at all.
We aren't endorsing any political viewpoint, and we're absolutely not declaring a winner in the energy transition. We are acting strictly as neutral guides to unpack the raw data and the reporting that's presented in the source material.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand how the map got flipped upside down, we really have to look at what is happening right now in the states that historically championed environmental policy. I mean, specifically California and New York.
Right. There is this very sudden, very real erosion of climate policies happening in these traditionally Democratic-led states.
Yeah, and let's start with California, because this one genuinely surprised me. So Governor Gavin Newsom previously touted their Cap and Invest program as this, ultimate tool against Trump's clean air rollback.
It was their flagship policy.
Exactly. But just recently, the state scaled it way back. They essentially handed over more than $3 billion in free pollution allowances to companies.
Which is just a massive, massive concession.
Right, $1 billion.
Right, and to understand why that's such a big deal, you have to look at how Cap and Invest is supposed to work. The government sets a hard limit on total greenhouse gas emissions, right? Exactly. Then companies have to buy permits for every ton of pollution they emit. And over time, the state lowers the cap, which means fewer permits, which drives the price up.
So it's supposed to squeeze them financially, making it too expensive to keep polluting.
Exactly.
But they just gave out $3 billion in free passes.
Yeah.
That feels like a hardcore fitness influencer suddenly telling you to eat fast food every day because groceries got too expensive.
That's a really good way to put it.
Right. Does the economic pressure actually justify completely abandoning the regimen? Because the article notes the new incentive is that polluters can reduce what they owe if they just prove they are spending on emissions-cutting tech.
Yeah, it's a promise to be cleaner tomorrow for a free pass today, and California isn't alone in this. New York is doing something very similar.
Oh, right, New York. They had that 2019 Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act.
They did, but they've recently weakened it significantly. First off, they delayed regulating carbon from 2024 all the way to 2028.
Just pushed it back 4 years.
Yep. And even more surprisingly, they dropped their hard 2030 mandate. They had a legally binding rule to cut planet warming pollution by 40% from 1990 levels.
And they just dropped it.
They replaced it with language that only aims for a 60% reduction by 2040, and only if it is feasible and cost-effective.
Wait, feasible and cost-effective. That just sounds like an administrative escape hatch so they don't have to do it.
What's fascinating here is how explicit state leaders are being about this. Governor Kathy Hochul and others are pointing directly at the balance sheet.
Because it's getting too expensive.
Exactly. The original goals are becoming completely untenable without driving energy costs way too high for everyday citizens, and we are seeing this broader trend everywhere.
Yeah, the Guardian piece mentioned Rhode Island too, right?
Right. Governor Dan McKee is trying to push back their 100% renewable requirement from 2033 all the way to 2050.
Wow, 2050.
Yeah. And Maryland is actively shrinking their emission targets just to lower consumer costs.
So the traditional climate leaders are essentially slamming on the brakes because of these economic hurdles, which brings up the craziest part of this whole thing. If the blue states aren't building, who actually is managing to build green energy right now?
The answer is pretty shocking, geographically and politically.
It's totally wild. So look at this data. In the year leading up to March 2026, 8 of the top 10 states for utility-scale renewable growth were states that voted for Donald Trump in 2024.
8 out of 10.
Yeah. Indiana grew by 36%, Kentucky by 31%, Utah by 29%.
And it's important to note, we mean utility scale here. So we aren't talking about rooftop solar panels on someone's house.
Right, we're talking huge grid-level infrastructure.
Exactly. Massive industrial projects.
And the undisputed king of this red state boom is Texas, which is nuts because Texas has massive historic ties to the oil and gas sector.
Right, you think Texas, you think oil derricks.
But they are the clean energy superpower of the U.S. right now. They already lead the country in wind energy, and in March 2026, they officially overtook California in utility-scale solar.
Yeah, Governor Greg Abbott is out there constantly boasting that Texas is the energy capital of the world.
But wait, this is where the contradiction just breaks my brain.
Okay, lay it out.
This local red state boom is happening at the exact same time that the Trump administration is actively, aggressively withdrawing clean energy incentives nationally.
Right.
They are slashing tax incentives for wind and solar. They're trying to halt offshore wind. He literally stands at podiums and calls clean power a scam.
He does.
Wait, so if their national party leader is calling it a scam, why is Texas building so much solar? Are they just like accidentally green because they just love building energy infrastructure, whether it's oil or wind?
That is exactly it. Unlike New York or California, Texas and these other red states have simply made it easier to build energy infrastructure in general.
So it's just about the red tape.
Pretty much. They aren't necessarily prioritizing green energy over dirty energy. They are prioritizing building over restricting.
Oh, I see.
In places like California, you have these massive environmental protection laws like CEQ that were designed to protect nature but are now weaponized by local groups to block green energy projects.
So they get stuck in lawsuits for years.
Exactly. But in Texas, they have a deregulated market. They don't have the same zoning hurdles. If you want to build a massive solar farm, you buy the land and you build it.
They just get it done.
Right. It's an incredibly streamlined process.
So this stark difference in the ability to build things, combined with those rising costs we talked about, brings us to the core issue driving all of this. It's driving the blue state retreat and the red state boom.
The affordability conundrum.
Exactly. Who pays the bill? Because the immediate trigger for this panic in state legislatures right now is that energy prices are spiking across the country.
Right. And the Guardian article points out that this is largely due to trade disruptions from the U.S.-Israeli war on Iran.
Yeah, the global market is just completely volatile right now.
And in the short term, lawmakers are arguing they have to protect consumers from these immediate price shocks.
Right, like that Maryland package we mentioned. They argue it's going to save ratepayers about $150 a year on their utility bills.
Which is real money for people struggling with inflation.
Sure. But then you have Bahram Fazeli from Communities for a Better Environment pointing out the massive flaw in California's plan. He says that giving free allowances in California just gives more money directly to the fossil fuel producers who are already raising prices during the Iran war.
Right. So you're subsidizing the people causing the price hike.
Exactly.
And when you look at the long-term view, climate advocates are saying this is a disaster. Johanna Bozua from the Climate and Community Institute argues that using affordability to weaken climate policy actually amplifies both crises.
Because the climate gets worse and it gets more expensive later.
Precisely. Anna Johnson actually estimated that Maryland's move to delay targets will eventually cost households $592 million.
Wait, $592 million?
Yeah, because the grid will have to procure more energy later, and it will be more expensive then.
Wow. And it's not just advocates saying this, right? The public sentiment is pretty wild, too.
The polling data is fascinating.
Yeah, because we have that poll showing 44% of people worry a great deal about global warming, which is near an all-time high.
Right, and then another poll shows that 65% of registered U.S. voters think global heating is actually driving up the cost of living.
So people know it's expensive. It honestly sounds like opting out of your car insurance because your monthly budget is tight.
That's exactly what it is.
Like, sure, you save $150 now,
Yeah.
but if you crash, you're ruined.
Are these states just putting off the inevitable?
They absolutely are. And Marza Pita Salazar had this really powerful quote about that. She said, the bill still comes due, but it shows up in emergency rooms, insurance premiums, and disaster recovery.
Oh, man.
And those costs are paid by everyday families, not the industry. So they're just shifting the burden down the line, which leaves us with a totally scattered map of American energy, where the rhetoric rarely matches the reality on the ground.
It really doesn't.
So just to wrap up this journey for you, the listener, we've seen blue states like New York and California basically pull back on these ambitious climate targets because of cost panics and red tape.
Right.
And at the exact same time, red states like Texas are quietly becoming these renewable superpowers simply by making it easier to build infrastructure of all kinds.
Deregulation at work.
Yeah. And again, just a final neutrality reminder here. We aren't passing judgment on the right or the left. We're just presenting the reality that the political labels we attach to climate action just don't match the actual data on the ground right now.
They really don't.
So what does this all mean?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it leaves us with a really provocative question.
Okay, let's hear it.
If red states are building massive amounts of green energy purely for economic dominance and infrastructure growth, rather than for, ideological climate reasons, does the motivation even matter?
That's a great point.
Right. If the end result is a greener grid, should we stop framing clean energy as a moral crusade and start treating it entirely as a ruthless, profitable building boom?
That is something to really think about. Does it matter why they build it, as long as it gets built?
Exactly.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. Keep questioning the headlines. We'll see you next time.
Don't forget to like and subscribe for the next episode on While We Were Distracted.